you hear me? Cool, everybody can hear me. Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and staying for our description on our graduate program in pharmaceutical sciences here through the Division of Pharmacotherapy and Experimental Therapeutics. My name is Dr. Daniel Krona, and I'm an assistant professor here in the same division as Dr. Dupuy. I serve as DPET's director for graduate admissions, and so my contact information is up there, and you guys can feel free to get a hold of me with any questions that you may have. At this point, I'd like to suggest that people on the line actually type in some questions, because in the same way that the fellowship had the opportunity for a panel discussion, joining me tonight are Dr. Sarah Salerno and Dr. Jim Baudouin, who are both third-year fellows in our division, well on their way to earning their PhDs. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in and our moderator will read them. If not, we have questions that people pre-submitted. So yeah, that will dive into our graduate program a little bit. So I don't think I need to dive too much deeper than Dr. Dupuy did, but just a little bit about Chapel Hill. We like to believe that we are regarded as one of the best college towns in America. As a main thoroughfare, Franklin Street is pretty famous for having just about everything. It has bars and restaurants, it has art galleries, it has theaters, and even houses of worship. But also, we're located at the western point of the RTP, or Research Triangle Park, which is home to just as vibrant of a scientific culture as Franklin Street has in sort of an entertainment culture. So we have a world-class institution at UNC, but also one 9 miles up the road at Duke, which is a possible source of collaboration, as well as regulatory bodies. We have the NIEHS, as well as the EPA. We also have, as Dr. Dupuy mentioned in the fellowship talk, tons of opportunity to work with industry partners, which include large pharma, also include CROs, and small startups. So about UNC Chapel Hill, obviously we are one of the leading public universities in the nation with a strong research focus and reputation. As an example, in 2014 alone, we received almost $800 million in research funding as an institution. And as you heard, and I will say it again, the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy is nationally and internationally recognized as one of the leaders in not only pharmaceutical sciences and pharmacy education, but in practice as well as in research. And that bared out when US World News and Reports in 2016 ranked us as the #1 pharmacy school in the nation. But as an aside, we were also recently ranked as the #6 overall pharmaceutical sciences and pharmacy program in the world, which is a pretty high ranking. Of course, it is #1 overall in the United States as well. So the school is one of 5 health affairs schools on the campus at UNC Chapel Hill, which also includes medicine, dental, nursing, and public health. And of course, we have really strong partnerships with the practicing physicians and pharmacists at the hospital, as well as with pharma, of course, and also with our regulatory agency partners, which include, like I mentioned, locally here, the EPA and the NIEHS, but also FDA and NIH up in Washington, D.C. So we are 2 schools, or we are one, excuse me, let me backtrack. We are 1 school on 2 campuses. So we have our main campus here in Chapel Hill, but we also have a satellite campus up in Asheville. And if you've never been to Asheville, it is absolutely breathtaking. Great place for food and drink and entertainment and art. But unfortunately, if you're applying to our PhD program, you will not be centered in Asheville. But fortunately for you, you will be in Chapel Hill, because Chapel Hill is a wonderful place. But if you're interested in research and in living in Asheville, I would suggest reaching out to one of the other divisions, and Dr. Delisha Carpenter would be a person to talk to. Her research is focused up there. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So we have 5 divisions in the school here that are kind of broken up from everything that spans drug discovery all the way through practice. And so as I mentioned, Dr. Delisha Carpenter is one of the other division directors for graduate admissions, but I will start closer to the drug discovery end of the spectrum. So for chemical biology and medicinal chemistry, we have Dr. Drew Lee, and that division focuses itself on the identification of novel compounds and probes that someday could work themselves into being an actual drug. Then a little bit farther down the line, we have pharmacoengineering and molecular pharmaceutics, and Dr. Phil Smith is the division director of graduate studies, who also doubles as their division director of graduate admissions. And that division focuses mainly on, now we have a compound, how do we get it into the body in the right way? They also do a lot with nanomedicine, so if you're interested in that kind of PhD program, then Dr. Smith would be the perfect one to talk to. Our division is sort of at that precipice of getting that drug from preclinical models into patients and being at that interface of preclinical and early phase drug development. So optimization of drugs, working on phase 1 through 4 trials, or mainly phase 1 through 3 trials, to be honest, and focusing on translating scientific data that comes from the bench, from the laboratory, and applying it at the bedside. And then vice versa, taking observations we see in the hospital and coming back to the bench. Now, I've mentioned Dr. Carpenter, but she represents the Pharmaceutical Outcomes and Policy Department, and they are focused on looking at anything from pharmacoeconomics to social and behavioral to medication adherence, and also implementation sciences. Now, our 5th division is the Practice and Science and Clinical Education division, and they, as their name would suggest, focus on the practice of pharmacy and clinical pharmacy. They do not actually have a PhD program. They do not offer one. They offer a master's degree, but those are for PGY2 residents in hospital administration. So no need to reach out to anybody from our PACE division if you're interested in a PhD program. But if you're interested in a PhD program in any of the other 4 divisions, there are the applicable names and email addresses. So what is our division all about? I kind of gave you a brief hint, but we strive to improve patient lives by leading the world in translating experimental and clinical pharmacology discoveries into the clinics and using them for more precision medicine. Our faculty is comprised of 33 main members and a host of adjunct members throughout the state and the nation and the world. But our faculty members here are primarily clinician scientists with either PharmDs or MDs, and are also experimentalists. Many of our faculties also have, in addition to a PharmD or an MD, a PhD. So, of course, we are experimentalists too. And a few of us are actually clinical trialists. Right now, our graduate student population is 17, but that ebbs and flows a little bit as people come and matriculate into our program. We usually admit about 3 to 5 applicants a year. And then, you know, it can go up to maybe 25, then come down to 17, depending on how many of our students have successfully defended their dissertation. So right now, we're at 17. We have 21 fellows, and you just heard an hour's worth of describing our fellowship program, so I won't go into too much detail about that. But we did not have one of our T32 fellows in clinical pharmacology here to represent, so if you have questions about that, I'm your guy. Go ahead and email me about that, because I'm a former T32 fellow in our clinical pharmacology program. That's just an aside. We also have 15 PhD-trained postdoctoral fellows in our division, so lots of amazing research going on, lots of knowledge to be shared with incoming grad students, so we're well stocked in that department. And we also have lots of other outside cores and centers that can help supplement and enrich your graduate school experience. So of course we have the division faculty, but we also have our Center for Pharmacogenomics and Individualized Therapy, of which I'm actually a faculty member. We have our Center for AIDS Research, Clinical Pharmacology, and Analytical Chemistry Laboratory and Core, which focuses on working with CFAR and our AIDS initiatives. We have our Analytical Chemistry and Pharmacology Core for our UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center, so doing all of the pharmacology work for our cancer research programs. And then we also have our pharmacometrics program, which is really new and exciting here. In addition to those cores and centers, we have the Eshelman Institute for Innovation, which is actively seeking novel and new and exciting ways to go about tackling tough problems in healthcare. We have our Pharm Alliance, which is an alliance between us and 2 other partners around the world. One is the University College in London, and the other is Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. So lots of opportunity to collaborate with partners from around the world and even potentially do a research rotation out of the country, which would be pretty cool. And like we mentioned earlier, the T32 Clinical Pharmacology Training Program is for our post-PharmD and post-MD graduate students who move along in the curriculum to a point where they're maybe senior grad students, third year and beyond, where they can actually work in tandem on a postdoctoral training program as they finish up their dissertation work. So the areas of coursework and research that we really focus in tend to be in drug metabolism and transport, as well as PK, PD, and pharmacometrics. We have a really great group of pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics researchers. We, of course, are going to focus in clinical trial design and biostatistic analysis. We have a healthy amount of people who are involved in experimental therapeutics, and we are always, I guess, as pharmacists, interested in mechanisms of drug toxicity. So the research or therapeutic areas of focus are in cardiology, as well as hepatology, gastroenterology, and transplant. We have a really robust infectious disease and HIV group. Our oncology hematology group is really fabulous as well. I to toot my own horn, I'm a part of that. We have really good researchers in pulmonology, and then Dr. Salerno is working here in pediatrics and pediatric pharmacology, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. And actually, one of the collaborations that I didn't mention that is available is actually with the Pediatrics Pharmacology Program. We actually have a nice collaboration with the Pediatric Trials Network at Duke University and the DCRI. So if you're interested in pediatrics and pharmacology, that's a very neat place where you could do research. So sorry for that little aside and backtrack, but it does bear sort of repeating some of our excellent resources for graduate students. So we offer 2 curricular tracks, and since this webinar is designed for people who are in pharmacy school and who will eventually get their PharmD, the majority of you are going to fit into the first one, which is our clinical track for students with a clinical degree. Obviously, we do not just matriculate students who have clinical degrees. We have non-clinical students who don't have a PharmD, MD, or DO, but the vast majority of those students do actually come to us with a Master's of Science or MS degree. So we have a really mature set of graduate students who are coming back for sometimes a second doctoral degree or a second graduate school education experience. So this is a real busy slide, and I don't intend for you to digest it in full. I just want you all to get kind of a flavor for some of the classes that are offered. They fit into those areas of research and I guess coursework that we wanted, so drug metabolism, PK, PD, and pharmacogenetics. But for the clinical track people, I wanted you to pay attention to that red box because our DPET 822 Advanced Clinical Pharmacy course is sort of a catch-all for your clinical experience across your first 2 semesters or your first 2 years. So that's one of the, I think, sort of jewels in the crown of our graduate program for our post-PharmD trainees is our clinical program, where our graduate students can do anything from designing their own clinical trial and working sort of in an auxiliary role to the clinic, or we have people that ebb towards the other side of the spectrum where they work in a clinic longitudinally every week, week in and week out for the course of their whole 5 years and really become the clinical pharmacist and clinical pharmacologist on that team. So it is what you make of it, but I think our clinical experience is one of the things that is really unique about this program. Now, that's not to say that our non-clinical track people can't get involved with clinical activities. Obviously, they're not licensed as either physicians or pharmacists, so they can't work autonomously, but we do make every effort to allow them access to the clinic, to our physicians, to do clinical and translational research. And some of their coursework is supplemented with introductions to molecular pharmacology and introductions to clinical pharmacology, classes that physicians and pharmacists would have received during their medical and pharmacy training. All right, so as far as financial support goes, one of the questions that we received ahead of time was, how much does graduate school cost? And the really great thing about it is it costs nothing. You guys get paid to go to school, which is, I know, a complete departure from your undergrad, unless you were an athlete or full scholarship, which was not me. So you had to pay to go to school. Or even your master's. You have to pay for a master's unless your company or your job is paying for it and you're exceedingly lucky. And then, of course, everyone knows for medical or dental or pharmacy or nursing, you're really paying. But we pay for you to go to school. So we believe we have a pretty competitive annual stipend as far as it goes among graduate programs. Our students earn a stipend of $30,000 a year. And for those students with a prior clinical degree, an MD or PharmD, you will receive an extra $5,000 per year stipend for your clinical service, for helping teach our PharmD students, for essentially providing professional service across the spectrum. Like I said, you do not pay tuition, which is a nice bonus, so you're not going to be walking out of here with loans. And approximately $900 of fees every semester are paid for you. And those go for paying for things like access to the library and journals, all the way to access to the gyms on campus and to healthcare, and this is the really great thing, access to the basketball team. So you would be able to go to games and engage in sports and also play sports yourself and go to the library and have healthcare, and we pay for it. So those are some of the perks of going to graduate school. So our graduate application process is, the information is housed actually on the UNC Graduate School website, so just gradschool.unc.edu. Some people don't realize that while your graduate school experience will occur out of the School of Pharmacy, it's facilitated by a much larger umbrella program at the UNC Graduate School. So information about our graduate school can be found there. Obviously, more granular details about our DPET program can be found on our website, but sort of the nuts and bolts of how to apply to UNC can be found at gradschool.unc.edu. So our application deadline is actually December 7th. And the reason why we encourage students to have all of their applications in by this deadline is that our student population tend to be really competitive for both intramural, which means on campus, as well as intramural, meaning outside the campus, fellowships. And so fellowship in this way is different than the fellowship program you heard about. In this way, it's a merit-based sort of supplement to your stipend. That comes, it can sometimes have an educational component to it, but essentially it's basically an award for you where you bring money back in. And we find that a lot of our applicants are very, very competitive for these fellowships, and so we have to have all of your application materials in so that the graduate school can assess those. And to do so, and to do so properly, we need you to have your applications in by December 7th. So if you're like me at this point in your career as a fourth-year student, you're now taking a big gulp and going, oh my goodness, I have to have my application materials in by December 7th. And oh, look at that next bullet point. I have to take the GRE. Yes, the GRE is a requirement for all of our applicants. But you can do it. You still got time. You're on this webinar. You're in the right place. So just know that the application deadline is the 7th. You do have to take the GRE. The TOEFLs, those are required for all our international applicants. 3 letters of recommendation are needed. So for me, what I chose was one of my research advisors. I chose one of my rotation advisors. And then I chose someone who I knew as a boss, someone who was there for me in my professional life. A statement of purpose, which is very important, that kind of outlines your vision as a researcher, past experiences in research, who would you want to work with, knowing that, identifying potential faculty here tells us that you're serious about research and that you've investigated the program. So that all that kind of stuff goes into the statement of purpose. We want to know about your research experience, and then we also want to know about volunteer and work experience, which those kind of come through on your CV. So I kind of jumped the gun here on one of our frequently asked questions, and is the GRE a requirement for application to the program? Yes, it is. That is a requirement of the graduate school as a whole. So no matter if you have a PharmD or an MD, or if you're just coming in with your bachelor's, you need to take the GRE. And yes, the TOEFL is required for international students with few exceptions, and those include Maybe you came as an international student and got your degree here in the United States. Say you got your PharmD, but you're from Korea. Then the TOEFL is not going to be required. Or if you received your degree outside of the United States, but in a country where English is spoken as a first language, Australia or England. Or if you went to a university in a school or in a country where English is not spoken as the first language, but English is spoken as the first language on that campus. So those are some of the exceptions to that rule. But if you have any questions, I would suggest going and getting them answered on the grad school website. So, the next two frequently asked questions basically ask, what do we look for in an applicant, and what is the typical successful applicant? And I'm going to be a little bit wishy-washy and say there is no typical applicant. We want really well-rounded people. So I can't tell you that a high GPA, a 4.0, is going to get you in. I can't tell you that 99th percentile GRE scores are going to get you in. What we like to see are people that are very well-rounded. So a really respectable GPA combined with really respectable GRE scores, and a person who has research experience as well as maybe some volunteer experience. That might be a well-rounded person that we're looking for. But more of my point is there's no one-size-fits-all in this program and in terms of applicants. So one of the things you might want to do to kind of gauge where you would stand versus some of the people who have been admitted into the program is go to that link or that hyperlink that's at the bottom of the third bullet point, that pharmacy.unc.edu about, and gives the fact book about our benchmarks that includes GPAs, GRE scores, TOEFL scores, and kind of a background swath of the different applicants that got into our program for about the last 5 years. So if you apply, I don't think it's if, I think it's when you apply, but if you apply, when can you expect to receive an update on your application? So our faculty gets together after mid-year and after all of the December 7th deadline has come and gone, and we review all of the applicants for everyone that comes in. So our strongest applicants actually get invited to come to Chapel Hill in late January for an in-person interview over our recruitment weekend. And then typically admission decisions are made in between, February, but definitely by the end of March for that admission year. And then if we extend an offer to you and you think it's the right place to go, how are you going to identify which laboratory you're going to work in? Well, first of all, hopefully you did your background research and you looked at our website and saw what our faculty, what they do, what their research focus is. And then when you came to research, our recruitment weekend, you made a connection with a certain faculty member or two. And then stayed in touch with them over the summer after you finished your PharmD and kind of before you came to Chapel Hill. But when you get to Chapel Hill, you're going to be able to do what are called rotations, laboratory rotations. And hopefully you'll have made a connection with one of our faculty. You do a rotation in their lab first. And if it doesn't work out or you want to try something new, you can do a second rotation in the spring semester. And then if you haven't really found your home, technically you can do a third rotation. Our handbook says that's okay in the first semester of your second year. Now, I haven't known anybody that has done that. Most people find their fit after the first or second rotation, but you have that opportunity to rotate through different labs, get to know different people, different management styles, and so if you have a specific research interest in terms of skill set like PK, PD, or you're really interested in oncology, please mention that in your statement of purpose, as well as if you have an idea of which faculty you'd like to work with. Go ahead and mention that as well. So if you have questions about the PhD program, you can find more information, like I mentioned, on our pharmacy.unc.edu website. Once you get there, you click the Divisions tab, and then once you've gotten in there, you click the DPET tab. And then to find more information about our PhD program, there is a link to the PhD program within that DPET sub-tab. Now, if you have really specific questions, feel free to email me. or they don't even need to be specific questions. They can be small, they can be large, they can have multiple parts, or just be a quick hitter. I don't mind. I will answer all of them. And in fact, I'll actually be at mid-year. I'm going to be helping recruit and interview for the fellowship program, but I'd be happy to set a date and time and get coffee and answer some questions for you if I could. So if you're going to mid-year, please feel free to reach out to me. And at this point in time, I'm going to welcome up Jim and Sarah, and I'm going to welcome Prani back. Prani's going to act as our moderator tonight, and we're going to answer some of your questions. I know some people had some questions about the admissions program, and then some had questions about being a student here. And as an aside, I'm a former graduate of the program, so I can wear both hats and give you perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to Prani.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. So the first question on live question here is, what is the benefit of doing a PhD over a fellowship? How would a student decide between the two?
So I put a lot of thought into that because I worked in industry for 2 years after pharmacy school before I went to graduate school. And based on what I learned from talking with people in the pharmacology department is, I mean, you can have a good career doing a fellowship, but there tends to be a ceiling if you want to do like more intense research. And so you definitely, if you're interested in going into like regulatory affairs or medical affairs, I was in drug safety, like a fellowship or residency is definitely adequate training for those departments. But if you want more of a solid research career, you should probably strongly consider getting a PhD.
So my background is a bit different. I got a bachelor's followed by a master's, so I never really considered the fellowship. I don't know if people with a master's are eligible for a fellowship. Oh, we actually don't know. So it's usually the PharmDs who apply for those. So I'm less equipped to answer that question, but I do see some people stating the advantages of having a PhD versus doing this fellowship experience. So it's kind of depends on the person and what you want from your career. So
I think one of the things when I was thinking about it, because I had advisors that told me do PGY1 and fellowship, and then I had other advisors that said, hey, you know, really for what your interests are, you should do the PhD. And for me, I got to have my cake and eat it too, because again, like I said, we have that clinical experience built in as a compulsory part of our PhD program, so I really didn't have to decide. But when it came down to it, kind of like what Sarah said, I think that, you know, it's not that there's not a depth of research with the fellowships. There clearly is, but certainly the amount of work that you can get done in 2 years is not quite as much as the amount of work you can get done in 5 years. So what the PhD does, I think, in terms of teaching you, in addition to teaching you research skills, just like the fellowship does, is the PhD, I think, is designed to help teach you really how to think, and how to think as a hardcore researcher, where the fellowships, I think, teach you how to think as a researcher, but more of a clinical researcher, right? And so I know for me, and Sarah and I do vastly different things in our research. There is no way I would have gotten the opportunity to run my own lab at this point by just doing the PharmD with a 2-year fellowship. I wouldn't have been well positioned for that, both in the job market or in my skill set. So, you know, having to avoid doing a lab-based postdoctoral fellowship on top of the first fellowship, I just said the PhD was the right way to go after my PharmD.
So the next questions, how many international students are there in the graduate program and are funded?
Are funded?
Yes. So she had in parentheses.
International. Are you international? No, you're not international. So we have an excellent track record of having international students, and in fact, yeah, we've got 1, 2, 4. So I think we have, of the 17, 4 to 5 of them for sure are. One of them, in fact, has her PharmD from the University of Pittsburgh and is now starting our program, but she actually is an international student from China. But, you know, one of the cool things is about having our international students is while they don't have the PharmD, they have the terminal degree from their country. They're pharmacists. They're just the same as we are. So one of the examples was from my year, one of the people that matriculated with me, she has a master's degree, but she had been a hospital pharmacist for 4 or 5 years in Seoul, Korea. So, you know, we have a long line of training international students, and in terms of support, the same applies for the students who are international. You know, the $30,000 stipend. Now, very rarely will they come in with a PharmD or an MD, but if they do, then they are eligible for that other $5,000. So there is not a pressure for those people to get auxiliary funding any more than we advocate for our domestic students to get fellowships to help supplement their stipend. So if you're an international student, please feel free to apply.
Okay. So this is more of a general question. What do you look for in a statement of purpose?
So I think I will, sorry to hog the mic. I'm not really, I don't like the attention on me this much, but this one actually I think seems more of a faculty question. And so what we look for, I think, as a faculty is really some keen insight into why you want a research career. Now, plenty of our clinical pharmacist friends who do PGY1 and PGY2 training go on to have fabulous careers in research, but they're not dedicated 100% time researchers. They're sort of tourists in the research arena while their main focus is clinical pharmacy. So what we want to know is, do you want to essentially spend some time of your career doing a little bit of research, or to supplement your clinical pharmacy career, or do you want to embed yourself in research? And why is it important to you? And what do your past experiences, what have those culminated in to tell you, hey, I want a career in research? And then, have you thought enough about our program and know our faculty enough by looking up what they do and their papers and their research programs to say, these people could be a right fit for me with my research interests? So there's nothing wrong, again, with clinical pharmacy and the research that they do, but we want to be able to differentiate from the people who want that type of research in their career to those people who are dedicated to careers in research.
Okay. So this question's for Sarah and Jim. Please explain pharmacometrics and what a graduate degree in that field might consist of.
So I guess pharmacometrics is more just in general, it's just characterizing drug concentrations throughout the body using mathematical modeling. So that's just a broad definition. There's different types of mathematical models, which you can learn about in intense detail if you come to our school and take our PKPD course. But so a typical job of a pharmacometrician, an industry, it could be different areas. You could be predicting first in human doses based on preclinical animal data. It can be developing a population model based on healthy adults using sparse samples and predicting what exposure might be for patients with renal or hepatic impairment, or in special populations like children. There's just many different research areas regarding pharmacometrics, but it's primarily just using mathematical modeling, using different types of software to predict drug concentrations.
Yeah, so it's about drug concentrations, also about drug effects, like systems pharmacology, those kinds of things. So in my lab, for example, there's a lot of preclinical models, a lot of, like, for example, the sandwich culture human hepatocyte model, or animal models where we would take the livers out and study basically the drug disposition. And using the data that you collect, you can run all these models to sort of learn what is going on, the drug disposition level, like learn about hepatic drug transporters or metabolizing enzymes. Using the mathematical model, you can learn about like what enzyme is affected or what not. So a lot of different approaches, but all very useful for industry, academia, etc.
Are there pharmacometricians in regulatory, like FDA and the NCI, places like that? Do you guys know?
Yeah. Yes. There are pharmacometricians in the FDA. Whenever the drug companies are going to submit data to the FDA, they're experts and they're able to, if you're going to use modeling to get around having to do a clinical study, there's going to be experts in that area that can critique and evaluate your model. And the FDA also does some of their additional research using publicly available data.
So another question is, what is the strongest component of the UNC graduate program that makes the graduates competitive in the job market? And also to add to that, generally what type of positions do they hold if they're a PharmD/PhD or an MD/PhD?
So the graduates, what positions do they hold?
Right, and also what's the strongest component?
So of course the strongest component is the faculty, right? I'm kidding. No, I think that to me, the strongest component that makes our graduates very competitive in the workplace is the environment here. And so for me, it's, we have world-class pharmacometricians here. We have a center for pharmacogenetics. We have a long history of PK, PD, and drug metabolism excellence. So faculty that cover all of the gamut of clinical pharmacology. But it doesn't just stop there. We have the #1 school of pharmacy in the nation, so that means we have top flight clinical pharmacists that we collaborate with. And one of the things that I think is unique to UNC that isn't as unique to other campuses as I would have originally thought is that there are a lot of the silos that get built up between pharmacy and medicine, or pharmacy and public health, or pharmacy and nursing even, that they're broken down here. They just don't exist. It is such a collaborative, multidisciplinary environment. And you might hear that from other places, but it is part of the culture here. We have a brand new imaging building that has the School of Medicine and School of Pharmacy on the placard on the same building. Same with our genetic medicine building, pharmacy and medicine together on the front placard. I mean, it's the environment for me. In terms of jobs, I'm not going to steal everybody's thunder, so I'll just, for me, some of my colleagues that were interested more in the clinical pursuit, so you can talk about people that maybe don't have the clinical interest. But for me, some of my colleagues that were ahead of me that did a real focused clinical experience with their PharmD and then got their PhD. A lot of them have faculty appointments. So Dr. Melanie Nickel is at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Jasmine Luzum and Dr. Dan Hertz are both at University of Michigan. All of us really did a lot of really robust longitudinal clinical experiences with our PharmD, as well as did high quality research, of course. Yeah, so I think a lot of us went into academia, and the clinical component really helped, I think, with some of us getting jobs, or at least with forming our own independent research hypotheses that were more clinically driven.
So I guess the first part of the question is, what about the environment here is conducive for success? I would say UNC, our department is very productive. So your faculty members, they publish a lot, and then they're successful at getting grants. And I think that's probably something that you should definitely want to look at. Who you want to work for is how much they've published and their success rate at getting grants. And then that gives you more opportunities to publish and to apply for grants yourself. And if you want to go into academia, that is definitely the most important thing, is funding and publications. In terms of what you do after graduation, there's so many different opportunities, but it's primarily, you can work in regulatory, you can work through the FDA, you can work in industry, in the DMPK group, clinical pharmacology, or just more metabolism, drug metabolism, or in academia, there's different positions. You can be like Dr. Krona and be mixed clinical and research, or you can be just primarily research and just have that clinical contact, which is more what my advisor is like. So it depends on what you're interested in, I guess.
The only thing I really want to add to that is that UNC as a whole has a lot of professional development opportunities. We're almost like overwhelmed by the opportunities, which are all optional, and most of these kinds of types of workshops or courses are free. So it's already up to you and your schedule whether you can participate with those kinds of professional development opportunities. But I think that's a big plus of this university for sure.
So the next question is more for Sarah and Jim. What are the graduation requirements?
There are so many. You have to complete all the coursework. You have to pass the qualifying exam, which is a written exam. Then for your oral exams, the first one is you've got your oral preliminary defense. So after you take all your classes and pass your written exam, then you have to go up in front of the faculty and present your proposed research proposal and answer any of their burning questions about your knowledge of the coursework you've taken so far. And then if you succeed in that area, then you have to write your dissertation proposal and then present your final dissertation proposal, which is very similar for all graduate programs.
Last one. To be accepted.
Oh, you have to have one first author publication, but hopefully you'll have much more than that.
First author publication related to your dissertation work, not a side project. And you need to pass your defense.
And then the last one, which they aren't aware of because they haven't gotten into it yet. That sounded really cocky. That wasn't meant to be. The last thing is having your written dissertation accepted by the grad school, which may sound like it's just a little check mark, and it really is. But they want your work to be perfect because it's going to end up in the library, right? It's going to end up in the library as a bound book that anybody can access. So, after you defend, you take this really deep breath and, you go celebrate, and then you come back to it, make all the corrections that your committee suggests, and then work with the grad school to essentially publish your work in a book form that ends up in the library. So it's small in comparison to all the other things, but it is part of the checklist that you have to do before you get to walk across the stage.
Okay. A logistics question, is on-site attendance required, or can they do part-time online?
So on-site attendance is required. Unfortunately, we don't have a distance program, graduate studies program. I think we're going to experiment in that in the future with the metrics group in a master's, not a PhD, but a master's. But that's not ready for prime time yet. You definitely cannot do this part time. This is not a part-time program. Graduate school is not a part-time gig, not in our division anyway. So if you're a working pharmacist, say, and I'm from Colorado, in Colorado, it wouldn't be for you if you thought you were going to be able to do it part-time as you worked as a pharmacist, or if you were looking not to relocate to North Carolina, unfortunately. So full-time gig, and it requires attendance here in Chapel Hill. Now, one thing that came up on the Tuesday webinar, I'll say, one person asked, are the people able to use their pharmacist license and work PRN? And the answer to that technically is yes. We do allow people to supplement their income by working PRN, but the limit on that is 10 hours a week. And that has to be approved by your research advisor whose lab you're working in early on, if it's in your first year, maybe second year, and then later by your entire dissertation committee. And usually they're pretty good about that as long as you're meeting deadlines and you're not failing classes and things like that. But any more than 10 hours, we don't really consider you to be serious about being in this program. So we know that making a little extra money is nice. We also want you to stay focused here. And I know that I didn't work, and I don't know if Sarah works, but in my opinion, those 10 hours that you are making a few extra bucks, it's nice, but those are 10 hours that you're not writing a paper, or those 10 hours that you're not writing a grant, and you're not preparing yourself for the actual career you want. So on-site attendance mandatory, no part-time, and yes, we do allow some PRN, but there's risks and benefits to that.
You have time for more questions?
One more.
Okay.
As long as you get them involved.
Okay, would you consider admitting students with non-science background degrees, such as economics? Yeah, unfortunately. Or we can talk about, can you explain some specific projects or areas of study that are currently being pursued?
You guys talk about your dissertation.
So my project is primarily focused on pediatric pharmacology. So I'm just now trying to brainstorm and coming up with my dissertation proposal. But it's going to involve using physiological-based pharmacokinetic modeling, which you might never have heard of, but it's just a different type of modeling where you're integrating physiology along with the drug properties to predict drug concentrations throughout the body in different tissues and organs. And I'm using this approach to characterize drug-drug interactions in children for drugs that are metabolized by CYP3A, which you're aware is, as pharmacists, the most common, the most important drug metabolizing enzyme in humans. And so I'm using PBK modeling to predict drug-drug interactions and then trying to validate it using sparse or limited data, because in children, unfortunately, we can't conduct these large drug-drug interaction studies. It's unethical. And so trying to use modeling to predict and validate using limited samples, which might be a more realistic approach to studying drug-drug interactions in children.
So there's a couple of genetics focused labs on campus. In my first rotation, I was in one of those labs. I was involved in a genome-wide association study of alcoholic hepatitis. And then I explored some other labs, and currently I'm in the Kim Brouwer lab, where we're working with a lot of preclinical models. We're also involved with clinical studies, all kinds of diseases, primarily liver diseases, and we're trying to find biomarkers for those diseases, especially hepatic transporter probes that can be used as biomarkers. A lot of PK modeling involved. Currently, I'm interested in this one drug that has caused toxicity in this clinical trial, and we're trying to understand what has caused that toxicity, if it's gender related, if it's metabolism related, that kind of approach. Yeah, there's all kinds of work. Like Dan is in a very interesting line of work that you might want to talk about yourself a little bit.
So my dissertation research was different than theirs. So we have somebody who is working in the metrics field doing mathematical modeling. We have someone who's doing PK/PD work and doing experimental work on the bench, but mine was I diverted right and took a right turn, and I worked with the pharmacogenetics group. So my dissertation was we had patient samples from a phase 3 clinical trial in kidney cancer, and it was an oral drug called sorafenib. So we looked at germline DNA, so the inherited DNA, not the tumor DNA, and we took 56 candidate genes of the drug pharmacology or the disease pathophysiology, looked at single nucleotide polymorphisms within those genes, and then did association studies between the SNPs or the variants and outcomes. So overall survival, then the progression and toxicities. And then when we found some interesting associations, we went back to the bench to try and understand the mechanisms of why that particular individual variant would change a person's survival when given a drug like sorafenib as part of the clinical trial, or why was this patient or these patients with this genetic polymorphism at higher risk for one of the main toxicities of the drug. So that's what I did during my dissertation. My lab now focuses more on epigenetic regulation, so understanding how post-translational modifications like acetyl groups or methyl groups lead to the way that DNA is presented, so how it can be transcribed. And in cancer, that's really important because we know some genes are out of control and upregulated, and if we know that it's based on an epigenetic modification, we can tailor drugs that come back around and silence that molecular pathway and potentially can shut down the cancer. So I still work in genitourinary malignancies, so kidney cancer, but prostate and bladder as well, but we've shifted a little bit towards the epigenetics world anymore. So if any of that sounds interesting, we run the gamut here. Please reach out to me. Any questions about the admission process or the finances or what we're looking for in an applicant, please get a hold of me. All of our graduate students have emails online. If you're interested and have questions that you don't feel comfortable asking a faculty, please reach out, not just Jim and Sarah, but other graduate students in the program. And if you're going to be at mid-year, reach out to me, let me know, and we can get together, have some coffee, and I can definitely tell you about the program and my own experience as a grad student, or also as our division director for graduate admissions. So at this point, I'd like to thank you guys, especially those on the East Coast, because it's getting late, of hanging in with us. I know that you got a lot of information, so we really do appreciate it, and we look forward to your application.